The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training compound as Elena Volkov stepped off the transport truck. Her boots hit the dusty ground with a soft thud, and immediately she felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. She was used to it by now. The stares, the whispers, the judgment that came before anyone even knew her name. She wore the same standard-issue uniform as everyone else, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her face bare of any emotion. At 28 years old, she had learned that showing nothing was better than showing too much. In a world that constantly demanded she prove herself, silence had become her armor. The training facility was located in the remote mountains, far from the cities and far from the comfortable lives most soldiers had known before. This was where the military sent those who wanted to join the elite sniper division. It was grueling, unforgiving, and designed to break anyone who wasn't completely committed. Elena picked up her gear bag and started walking toward the barracks. Behind her, she heard the snickering begin. It always started the same way. Low voices thinking she couldn't hear, thinking she wouldn't notice. Another one trying to prove something, a male voice said, dripping with amusement. She won't last a week, another responded. They never do. Bet she's here because of some quota. You know how it is now. They have to let them in even if they can't handle it. The laughter that followed was mean-spirited and loud enough to ensure she heard it. Elena's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept walking. She had heard worse, much worse, and she would hear it again tomorrow, and the day after that, until she either quit or proved them so completely wrong that they had no choice but to swallow their words. The barracks were basic. Rows of metal bunk beds, thin mattresses, and lockers that had seen better days. She found an empty bunk in the corner, far from the others, and began unpacking her belongings. A few personal items, photos she kept face down, a worn notebook, the essentials. As she organized her space, more recruits filed into the barracks. Most were men, their bodies already hardened by previous military service. They moved with confidence, with swagger, claiming their spaces and greeting each other with the easy camaraderie of those who believed they belonged. A few women were scattered among them, and Elena noticed how they clustered together, forming an immediate alliance against the overwhelming masculine energy that filled the room. One of them, a blonde woman with sharp features, glanced in Elena's direction and offered a tentative smile. An invitation to join their group. Elena looked away. She wasn't here to make friends. She wasn't here to fit in or be accepted. She was here for one reason only, and that reason had nothing to do with anyone else in this room. That evening, during the first assembly, the training instructors laid out the expectations. The program would last 12 weeks. Only the top performers would earn their place in the sniper division. The rest would be reassigned to regular infantry or sent home in shame. Sergeant Kozlov, a thick-necked man with a face like weathered stone, paced in front of the assembled recruits. His eyes scanned the group with open disdain. "Look around you," he barked. "Most of you don't belong here. Most of you will fail. Sniping isn't about strength or speed. It's about patience, discipline, the ability to become invisible, to wait for hours, days if necessary, for one perfect shot." His gaze landed on Elena, and his lip curled slightly. "It's about mental toughness," he continued, still staring at her, "and some of you simply don't have what it takes. You can pretend, you can play soldier, but when it matters, when everything is on the line, your true nature reveals itself." The message was clear. He had already decided she would fail. That night, as Elena lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The small village where she grew up, the forests where her grandfather had taught her to hunt, the patience required to track deer through the snow, the steady hand needed to make a clean kill. She thought about the promises she had made, the people she had lost, the reasons she couldn't afford to fail. Around her, the barracks filled with the sounds of sleep, snoring, shifting bodies, the occasional muttered dream. But Elena remained awake, her mind already preparing for what tomorrow would bring. She knew they expected her to quit. They wanted her to prove their assumptions correct. Every smirk, every dismissive comment, every doubt they threw at her was designed to wear her down, to make her believe what they believed about her. But they didn't know her story. They didn't know what she had survived. They didn't know that their mockery was nothing compared to the demons she faced every single day. The darkness in the barracks was complete now, broken only by the faint red glow of the exit sign above the door. Elena finally closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. It never did. Instead, she mentally prepared herself for the battle ahead. Not against the targets or the training, against the prejudice. Against the men who had already decided she wasn't good enough. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. And Elena Volkov was ready to show them exactly who they were dealing with, even if she had to do it in complete silence. The first week of training was designed to destroy bodies and break spirits. 5 o'clock wake-up calls, 20-kilometer runs with full packs, endless drills in weapon maintenance, camouflage techniques, and field survival. The instructors pushed everyone to their limits, searching for weakness like predators sensing injured prey. Elena moved through it all like a ghost. She never complained, never asked for help, never showed the exhaustion that must have been burning through her muscles like everyone else. While other recruits groaned and cursed during the morning runs, she simply kept pace, her breathing steady, her expression blank. This only made things worse. "Look at her," Private Dmitry Sokolov muttered during a water break on the third day. He was a tall man with cruel eyes and a reputation for washing out female recruits in previous training cycles. "Acting like she's better than everyone. Too good to even talk to us, huh?" His friend Victor laughed. "Maybe she's mute. You ever hear her say anything?" "She thinks silence makes her mysterious," Dmitry continued loud enough for others to hear. "Makes her seem tough, but we all know the truth. She's terrified. She's in over her head and she knows it." The other men around him chuckled, grateful for the entertainment, anything to distract from their own suffering. Elena sat alone away from the group, drinking water and checking her equipment. She heard every word, she always did. But she gave them nothing, no reaction, no acknowledgement, just the same neutral expression she wore like a mask. The physical training was brutal, but Elena had expected that. What she hadn't fully prepared for was the constant psychological warfare. The instructor seemed to take special interest in testing her limits in ways that had nothing to do with actual sniper skills. During an equipment inspection, Sergeant Kozlov spent 15 minutes examining her gear, finding imaginary faults that would force her to clean everything again. During meals, she often found her portion accidentally reduced. During formation, she was always singled out for demonstration, forced to perform tasks while the others watched and waited for her to fail. But she never did fail. Not in the ways they expected. On the 5th day, during a navigation exercise in the forest, Elena's group was deliberately split up. She found herself paired with Dmitry and 2 of his friends. They were supposed to work together to reach a checkpoint 5 kilometers away, using only a map and compass. The moment they were out of sight of the instructors, Dmitry's demeanor changed. "Listen carefully," he said, stepping close to her. "We're going to make this very simple. You stay quiet, follow our lead, and maybe we'll let you tag along without making this harder than it needs to be." Elena looked at him with those calm, dark eyes and said nothing. "You understand?" he pressed, his voice taking on an edge. "Or are you actually mute?" She turned away and started walking in the correct direction, according to her compass reading. The men exchanged glances, irritation flashing across their faces. "Hey," Victor called out. "Where do you think you're going?" Elena didn't stop. She had calculated the route. She knew exactly where the checkpoint was. Whether they followed or not was their choice. For a moment, the men stood there, confused by her defiance. Then Dmitry's face darkened. He jogged to catch up with her, grabbing her arm roughly. "When I talk to you, you answer," he snarled. Elena stopped. She looked down at his hand, gripping her arm, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. There was something in that gaze that made him uncomfortable. Not fear, not anger. Just a cold, measuring assessment that made him feel like he was being evaluated by a predator, deciding if he was worth the effort. He released her arm. Taking a step back despite himself, she continued walking. The men followed, now silent and unsettled. They reached the checkpoint in record time, with Elena leading the entire way without saying a single word. The instructor at the checkpoint marked their arrival time and nodded approvingly. Dmitry tried to take credit for the navigation, but the instructor's knowing look suggested he wasn't fooled. By the end of the first week, a clear pattern had emerged. Elena consistently scored in the top 3 for every physical test. Her equipment was always perfect. Her knowledge of tactics and protocol was flawless, and yet she remained completely isolated, speaking only when directly questioned by instructors, and even then, only with the minimum words necessary. The other female recruits had tried to reach out to her during the first few days, but after being met with polite but firm distance, they gave up. The men mostly ignored her now except for Dimitri's group, who seemed to take her silence as a personal insult. "She thinks she's special," Dimitri complained to anyone who would listen, walking around like she's already proved something. "But she hasn't faced the real test yet. Anyone can run and do push-ups. Let's see how she handles actual shooting." The shooting range was where everything would change. It was where recruits would finally get their hands on the sniper rifles they had come here to master, where natural talent would separate itself from mere determination. Dimitri and his friends were convinced this would be Elena's downfall. How could someone so small, so quiet, so fundamentally wrong for this role possibly compete with men who had been training with firearms their entire lives? On the morning of the first range day, Elena woke before the alarm. She lay in her bunk, listening to the pre-dawn silence, and thought about her grandfather. She could almost hear his voice, rough and kind, teaching her the fundamentals when she was just a girl. "Shooting is not about power, little one. It is about breath, about heartbeat, about becoming so still that you are part of the earth itself." She had been 8 years old, barely able to lift his hunting rifle, but she had learned. Day after day, season after season, she had learned. The instructors didn't know that. Dimitri didn't know that. None of them knew anything about her, and that was exactly how she wanted it. As the others began to wake, grumbling and stretching sore muscles, Elena was already dressed and ready. Today would be different. Today she would finally be able to do what she came here to do, and today, for the first time, they would begin to understand that their mockery had been directed at the wrong person. The shooting range sprawled across a valley between two hills, with targets set at various distances. The morning air was crisp and still, perfect conditions for marksmanship training. The recruits assembled in formation, their excitement barely contained. This was the moment many had been waiting for since they arrived. Sergeant Kozlov stood before them, a rifle cradled in his arms like a beloved child. Behind him, a row of weapons lay on a table, each one cleaned and prepared for the day's training. "This is the Dragunov SVD, he announced, holding up the rifle. "Semi-automatic, effective range of 800 meters in capable hands. Today, you will learn basic operation. Tomorrow, you will begin actual qualification shooting. By the end of next week, we will know who among you has the natural ability to continue in this program." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the group. "Some of you have been shooting since childhood. Others have never touched a precision rifle. Neither matters. What matters is whether you can control your body, your breath, your mind. A sniper who cannot find calm in chaos is useless to this military." The recruits were divided into groups of 5. Elena found herself, unsurprisingly, grouped with Dimitri and his friends. The assignment was clearly intentional, designed to create maximum discomfort for her. The instructors wanted to see how she handled pressure from her peers, as well as the technical demands of shooting. Each group received one rifle to share, taking turns at the firing line while others observed. Dimitri immediately claimed the first position, asserting his dominance as he always did. He approached the shooting bench with confidence, settling into position with practiced ease. The target was set at 300 meters, a standard distance for initial training. Not particularly difficult for someone with basic shooting experience, but enough to separate those with natural ability from those without. Dimitri fired 5 rounds in quick succession. 3 hit the target, 2 missed completely. He stood up, trying to mask his disappointment. "Just warming up," he muttered, getting a feel for the weapon. Victor went next, achieving similar results. Then the others in their group, each managing to land a few shots on target but nothing impressive. The instructors watched with neutral expressions, taking notes but offering no feedback. Finally, it was Elena's turn. She approached the bench while the men in her group exchanged knowing glances. This would be entertaining. They positioned themselves behind her, close enough to watch every movement, close enough to make her uncomfortable with their presence. Elena ignored them completely. She picked up the Dragunov, feeling its weight, its balance. She checked the magazine, the bolt, the scope adjustment. Her movements were economical, practiced, betraying a familiarity that none of the instructors expected. She settled into the shooting position, her body alignment perfect. The rifle nestled into her shoulder pocket as naturally as if it had been made for her. She adjusted the scope, making minute corrections that showed understanding beyond what a novice should possess. Behind her, Dmitri smirked. Maybe she's done this before. Maybe Daddy took her hunting once or twice. Let's see if that helps her now. Elena's breathing slowed. She became absolutely still, so still that she seemed to merge with the bench itself. The world narrowed to nothing but the target, the crosshairs, the gentle pressure of her finger on the trigger. She fired. The target at 300 meters showed a perfect center hit. The spotters confirmed it immediately. She fired again. Another center hit, less than an inch from the first. The smirk faded from Dmitri's face. The casual conversation among the observers died away. Elena fired 3 more times in smooth succession. 5 shots, 5 perfect center hits grouped so tightly they formed a cluster smaller than a playing card. She stood up, safed the weapon, and stepped back without a word. Her face showed nothing. No pride, no satisfaction. Just the same neutral expression she always wore. Sergeant Kozlov approached the bench, his weathered face unreadable. He picked up the binoculars and studied the target for a long moment. Then he looked at Elena, really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Who taught you to shoot?" he asked. "My grandfather," Elena replied. Her voice was quiet but steady. The first complete sentence many of them had heard her speak. "What did he do?" "He was a hunter, and before that he served in the military." Kozlov nodded slowly, processing this information. "You will demonstrate again tomorrow at 500 meters. It wasn't a request. It was a command, and also perhaps the first sign of respect she had received since arriving. The rest of the day's training continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. The other recruits watched Elena differently now. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by confusion and, in some cases, resentment. Dmitri was particularly angry. As they cleaned weapons at the end of the day, he worked next to Victor, his movements sharp and aggressive. "Lucky shots," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "She probably practices that one drill over and over. 300 meters, perfect conditions, no pressure. Wait until things get real. Wait until it's cold, windy, with hostile forces tracking your position. She'll crack like everyone else." But his words lacked conviction now. He had seen what they all had seen. That grouping wasn't luck. It was skill. Pure, undeniable skill. That evening during mess hall, Elena ate alone as usual. But now people watched her openly rather than pretending she didn't exist. The other female recruits whispered among themselves, their expressions a mixture of admiration and jealousy. The men were divided between those who saw her as a threat and those who were beginning to reconsider their initial judgments. In the corner of the mess hall, a figure observed the entire scene with keen interest. Colonel Mikhail Petrov had arrived at the training facility that afternoon for a routine inspection. He was a legend in the military, a veteran sniper with more confirmed kills than anyone in active service. His presence at the facility was meant to be brief, just a formality to review the new crop of recruits. But something had caught his attention. One of the instructors had mentioned an unusual recruit, a woman who barely spoke, but who had demonstrated remarkable shooting ability on her first day at the range. Intrigued, the colonel had decided to observe tomorrow's demonstration personally. He watched Elena now, noting her isolation, the way she seemed completely comfortable being alone, the discipline evident in every movement. He recognized something in her that others missed. It wasn't just skill, it was the mindset, the ability to separate herself from everything around her and exist in a space of pure focus. He had seen it before, in the best snipers he had ever known. It couldn't be taught. It was either there or it wasn't. Tomorrow would be interesting, he thought. Tomorrow would reveal whether this woman was simply good, or whether she possessed something rare, something exceptional. As the mess hall emptied and the recruits returned to their barracks, Elena remained seated for a moment longer. She was thinking about the demonstration tomorrow. 500 meters was more challenging. The target would be smaller, the margin for error reduced. Wind would become a factor. Bullet drop would require precise calculation. But she wasn't worried. She had made shots like that 1,000 times in the forests with her grandfather. She had learned to read the wind by watching leaves, to judge distance by the size of a deer's ear, to control her heartbeat until it barely existed. The others could mock her. They could doubt her. They could try to intimidate her with their words and their presence. None of it mattered. When she was behind a rifle looking through a scope, the world fell away. There was only the shot, only the target, only the moment of perfect stillness before the trigger press. And in that moment she was absolutely untouchable. The morning arrived with an unexpected change in weather. Gray clouds had rolled in overnight, bringing a steady crosswind that swept across the valley. The instructor smiled grimly. Perfect conditions to separate pretenders from genuine talent. Word had spread about the demonstration. What was supposed to be a simple training exercise had transformed into something else entirely. Recruits who weren't scheduled for range time that morning found reasons to be there anyway. They gathered in clusters, ostensibly cleaning equipment or reviewing technical manuals, but really waiting to see if yesterday's performance was a fluke. Colonel Petrov arrived just after dawn, accompanied by his aide. He wore a simple field uniform without the decorations his rank entitled him to display. He preferred to observe without drawing attention, to see how soldiers performed when they thought only their immediate superiors were watching. Sergeant Kozlov spotted the colonel immediately and straightened, surprised by the visit. The colonel waved him off with a subtle gesture. "Continue as planned. Pretend I'm not here." Elena went through her morning routine with the same methodical precision as always. Physical training, equipment check, a small breakfast that she ate alone, while the others gathered in their social groups. She noticed the increased attention, the way conversation stopped when she passed, but she gave no indication it affected her. At the range, Kozlov assembled the recruits and explained the day's exercise. Each person would take 5 shots at a target, positioned 500 meters downrange. The goal was to achieve at least 3 hits within the scoring circle, which was roughly the size of a human torso. "Conditions are not ideal," Kozlov announced, his voice carrying across the range. "You will need to account for wind drift and adjust accordingly. This is where theory meets reality, where you discover if you truly understand ballistics or if you've just been memorizing formulas." Dmitri volunteered to go first again, eager to redeem himself after yesterday's mediocre performance. He took his time settling into position, checking the wind flags positioned along the range, making calculations. He fired 5 rounds carefully, pausing between each shot to reset. 2 hits, 3 complete misses. His face flushed with frustration as he cleared the weapon and stepped away from the bench. The other recruits followed one by one. Results were mixed. Some managed 3 hits. Most achieved only 1 or 2. A few missed the target entirely, their rounds sailing wide as they misjudged the wind correction. The conditions were genuinely difficult, even for experienced shooters. When Elena's turn came, the murmuring among the observers grew louder. This was the moment they had been waiting for. This would prove whether yesterday was skill or accident. She approached the firing line carrying the Dragunov with casual confidence. She set the rifle down, positioned her shooting mat, and arranged her equipment with practiced efficiency. Then she settled into a prone position, the most stable shooting posture for maximum accuracy. From his observation post, Colonel Petrov leaned forward slightly. He noticed details others missed. The way she positioned her body at a slight angle to the target, reducing recoil impact. The way she built her position from the ground up, ensuring bone support rather than muscle tension. These were techniques taught to advanced snipers, not basic recruits. Elena chambered around and acquired the target through her scope. The wind was gusting inconsistently, making calculations difficult. She watched the flags, noted the movement of grass between her position and the target, observed the mirage effect visible through her scope at this magnification. She waited. 30 seconds passed, a minute. The observers grew restless. Some assumed she was hesitating, losing nerve under pressure, but Colonel Petrov understood. She was reading the environment, waiting for the wind pattern to reveal itself. Patient as stone. Finally she fired. The spotters called out the hit. Dead center. She worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round. Again she waited, watching for the wind to align with her solution. 20 seconds this time, second shot, center mass. The third shot came after only a 10-second pause. She had found the rhythm now, the pattern in the wind's chaos. 4th shot, center, 5th shot, center, 5 shots, 5 perfect hits. Not just within the scoring circle, but grouped in an area smaller than a man's fist, at 500 meters, in difficult wind conditions, on what was supposed to be her second day ever touching a precision rifle. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Sergeant Kozlov stood motionless, staring downrange at the target as if unable to process what he had just witnessed. Colonel Petrov rose from his position and walked toward the firing line. His aide followed, equally stunned. The recruits parted instinctively as the colonel approached, only then realizing who had been observing the entire demonstration. Elena had safed the rifle and was packing her equipment, her expression unchanged. She didn't see the colonel approaching until his shadow fell across her shooting mat. She looked up, recognized the rank insignia, and immediately stood to attention. "At ease," the colonel said quietly. His eyes were sharp, evaluating. "What is your name?" "Elena Volkov, sir. You have done this before." "This is not beginner's shooting." It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "My grandfather trained me from a young age, sir. He believed everyone should know how to provide for themselves." "Your grandfather was a hunter?" "Yes, sir. And before that, he served as a sniper during the border conflicts. He rarely spoke about it, but sometimes he would teach me things, principles, techniques." The colonel nodded slowly. Something clicked into place in his mind. "Your grandfather's name?" "Viktor Volkov, sir." Recognition flashed across the colonel's weathered face. "I knew Viktor. Not well, but I knew of him. He was one of the best in his generation, silent as death and just as certain." He paused, studying Elena with new understanding. "You learned from a master whether you realized it or not. But learning and doing are different things. Why are you here? Why join the military? Why seek this path?" For the first time since arriving at the training facility, something shifted in Elena's expression. A brief flicker of emotion there and gone so quickly that most would have missed it. "My younger brother," she said simply. "He joined the military 3 years ago. Infantry. He was killed during a conflict in the Eastern Territories. The report said he died from a sniper that his unit never saw, never heard, never had a chance to defend against." The colonel waited, sensing there was more. "I want to be better than whoever took my brother," Elena continued, her voice steady despite the pain beneath the words. "I want to be so good that when I am deployed, our soldiers come home. I want to be the reason families don't receive the kind of notification mine did." The colonel regarded her for a long moment. He had heard many reasons over his career for why people became snipers. Revenge, glory, a talent for shooting. But this quiet determination to protect others through the mastery of a deadly skill, this was different. "Your brother would be proud," he said finally. "Viktor certainly would be." He turned to Sergeant Kozlov, who had been listening to the entire exchange with growing understanding. "This recruit is to receive advanced individual training," the colonel ordered. "She has already exceeded the basic qualification standards. Place her in the accelerated program with the senior trainees. I want to see what she can do with proper military refinement of her existing skills." Kozlov saluted crisply. "Yes, sir." "Immediately, sir." The colonel looked back at Elena. "You will find the advanced program significantly more challenging than basic training. The targets will be farther, the conditions worse, the expectations higher. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes, sir," Elena replied without hesitation. "Good. Report to the advanced range tomorrow morning at 0500. Bring your gear and your focus. You will be training with shooters who have years of experience. Some will resent your presence. Others will try to prove you don't belong. Show them the same thing you showed everyone here today." "I will, sir." As the colonel walked away, the crowd of observers slowly dispersed, their conversations a mixture of shock, admiration, and in some cases anger. Dmitri stood frozen, his face pale. Everything he had said, every insult and dismissive comment now hung in the air like poison. Elena finished packing her equipment and walked back toward the barracks. She felt the stares. She heard the whispers. But for the first time since arriving, she also felt something else. Not acceptance, perhaps, but acknowledgement. They could no longer pretend she didn't exist. They could no longer dismiss her as someone playing at being a soldier. She had proven herself in the only language they understood. The language of capability, of performance, of results that could not be argued with or explained away. But Elena knew this was only the beginning. The real test was still ahead. The advanced training range existed in a different world from the basic facility. Located deeper in the mountains, accessed by a rough road that took 30 minutes to traverse, it was where the military refined raw talent into precision instruments. The shooters here weren't recruits anymore. They were specialists who had already proven themselves worthy of continued investment. Elena arrived before sunrise, as ordered. The facility was smaller than the main compound, more focused. There were fewer buildings, fewer people, and an atmosphere of intense concentration that even the early morning silence couldn't diminish. She found the designated barracks and dropped her gear on an empty bunk, aware that she was alone. The other advanced trainees would arrive throughout the morning. At precisely 5 o'clock, she reported to the rangemaster's office. Lieutenant Andrei Volkov, no relation despite the shared surname, was a lean man in his 40s with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much combat. He looked up from his paperwork as Elena entered and saluted. "You're the one the colonel sent," he said, neither welcoming nor hostile. "The girl who shoots like her grandfather taught her." "Yes, sir. Viktor Volkov was legendary. You have a reputation to live up to or live down, depending on how you look at it." He stood and walked to a map mounted on the wall. "Advanced training isn't about perfect conditions and stationary targets anymore. We train for reality, moving targets, unknown distances, elevation changes, urban environments, everything you might face in actual deployment." He pointed to various locations on the map. "You'll rotate through different scenarios. Fieldcraft, stalking exercises where you must get within 200 meters of an observer without being detected. Night shooting, shooting from unconventional positions. And distance. We have targets out to 1,500 meters here. Eventually we'll push beyond that." Elena listened intently, absorbing every detail. "The other trainees have been here for 6 weeks already," Lieutenant Volkov continued. "They're ahead of you in terms of military-specific training, though the colonel seems to think your fundamentals are exceptional. You'll need to catch up quickly. There's no coddling here. No one will slow down to accommodate you." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" He studied her for a moment. "You've been shooting since childhood, but always alone or with your grandfather. This program requires teamwork. Spotters and shooters must work as a single unit. Communication is essential. I'm told you barely speak. That's going to be a problem." "I speak when necessary, sir." "That's not the same as effective communication. A sniper team in the field depends on constant, clear exchange of information. Windage, distance, target movement, threat assessment. If you can't articulate what you observe, you're a liability regardless of how well you shoot." Elena absorbed the criticism without reaction. He wasn't wrong. She had built walls around herself, used silence as protection. But those walls would need to be adjusted if she wanted to succeed here. The other advanced trainees began arriving around 6. There were 8 of them, all men, all veterans of the basic program who had scored high enough to continue. They ranged in age from mid-20s to late 30s. Each carried themselves with the confidence of proven capability. Their reactions to Elena's presence varied. Some were merely curious. Others were openly skeptical. One man, a stocky shooter named Alexei with a scarred face and cold eyes, was actively hostile. "This is the colonel's pet project?" he asked Lieutenant Volkov, not bothering to hide his disdain. "We're supposed to slow down our training to babysit someone who probably only got here because of politics." "She's here because she can shoot," Volkov replied evenly. "Whether she stays is up to her performance, same as everyone else. Let me guess. 300 meters, perfect conditions. She made a decent group and everyone acted like she discovered fire. 500 meters, 12-knot crosswind, 5 shots, grouping under 4 inches. That stopped Alexei's mockery cold. The other trainees exchanged glances. That was legitimately impressive, especially for someone supposedly new to precision shooting. "Then let's see if she can do it again," Alexei challenged. "Right now. Prove it wasn't a fluke." Lieutenant Volkov considered for a moment, then nodded. "Range is open. 700 meters. Standard target. 5 rounds. Everyone will shoot. We'll see where our new trainee actually stands." The group moved to the range as a unit. The targets at 700 meters were barely visible to the naked eye, small dark shapes against the hillside. Wind flags showed a variable breeze, shifting direction every few minutes. Clouds continued to dominate the sky, affecting light conditions. Alexei went first, establishing the standard. He was good, very good. 5 shots, 4 solid hits, 1 just outside the scoring ring. He stood from the firing line with a satisfied expression, clearly expecting Elena to fail to match his performance. The others shot in turn, their results ranging from 3 to 4 hits. These were skilled marksmen, far beyond the basic recruits Elena had trained with. This was the real competition, the level she would need to reach and exceed if she wanted to fulfill her promise to herself and her brother's memory. When Elena's turn came, she approached the bench with the same calm demeanor she always displayed. She built her shooting position methodically, checking every detail. Then she acquired the target through her scope and began her analysis. 700 meters introduced new complications. Bullet drop was significant. Wind drift would push rounds several inches off course if not calculated correctly. The mirage visible through the scope made precise holdovers difficult to judge. She would need to rely on instinct as much as calculation. She fired her first shot, hit slightly right of center. Adjustment, second shot. Center mass, third shot. Center, fourth shot. Center, fifth shot. Center, 4 perfect hits and 1 near perfect. Better than Alexei. Better than everyone who had shot that morning. The silence that followed was different from before. These men were professionals. They recognized skill when they saw it, even if they didn't like where it came from. Acceptable, Lieutenant Volkov said, which coming from him was high praise. You have the fundamentals. Now we'll see if you can apply them under pressure. Over the following days, Elena was thrown into scenarios that tested every aspect of sniper craft. Stalking exercises where she had to crawl hundreds of meters through rough terrain, while observers with binoculars actively searched for her. She learned to use natural cover, to move only when wind disturbed the vegetation around her, to become invisible through patience and perfect stillness. Night shooting exercises where targets were barely visible shadows, and she had to rely on different techniques to estimate distance and wind. Urban environment training where she had to find firing positions in mock city structures and engage targets, while accounting for bullet deflection off concrete and glass. Through it all, she remained largely silent, speaking only when required to coordinate with spotters or report observations. But she listened constantly, absorbing knowledge from instructors and fellow trainees alike. She watched how the experienced shooters approached problems, noted their techniques, adapted what worked and discarded what didn't. Alexei continued to push her, challenging her to shoot in increasingly difficult conditions, clearly hoping to find her breaking point. But if he expected her to crack under pressure or lash out at his constant needling, he was disappointed. Elena simply performed. Day after day, shot after shot, she demonstrated the same unshakable consistency that had first caught the colonel's attention. 3 weeks into advanced training, Lieutenant Volkov announced a special exercise. Tomorrow we go to the extreme range, 1,200 meters minimum, 1,500 if conditions allow. This is where theory stops and art begins. At this distance, you're accounting for Earth's rotation, air density, temperature gradients. The bullet is in flight long enough that tiny errors become massive misses. He looked directly at Elena. You've proven you can shoot at conventional distances. Tomorrow we find out if you have what it takes to be truly exceptional. The colonel will be observing. He wants to see if his instinct about you was correct. That evening, Elena sat outside the barracks alone, cleaning her rifle and thinking about the challenge ahead. 1,200 meters was beyond anything she had attempted with her grandfather. The physics became exponential at that range. She would need to trust her training, her instincts, and her ability to read conditions that existed between her position and a target almost a mile away. She didn't notice Alexei approaching until he spoke. You know why I've been hard on you? He asked, his tone less hostile than usual. Elena looked up but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. My sister tried to be a sniper. She was tough, smart, could shoot decently, but she wasn't built for it mentally. The isolation, the pressure, the knowledge that your mistake costs lives. She washed out and it broke something in her. He paused. When you showed up, I saw her. I wanted you to fail because I thought it would save you from the same pain. I'm not your sister, Elena said quietly. No, Alexei agreed. You're not. You're something else entirely. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. That's a shot most of us haven't successfully made. If you can do it, truly do it with consistency, you'll be better than 90% of the snipers in this military. The morning air was cold enough to see breath, the sky clear for the first time in days. Perfect visibility stretched across the mountain valley. revealing the extreme distance range in its full, intimidating scope. Colonel Petrov arrived early, bringing with him two other senior officers who had heard about the unusual recruit and wanted to witness her capabilities firsthand. The extreme range was set up differently from standard facilities. Targets were positioned at various distances marked clearly with range flags. 1,200 meters, 1,500 meters, and beyond that, almost hidden in the distance, targets at ranges that pushed the absolute limits of the rifles they were using. 2,000 meters, 2,500 meters. These distances were where shooting became as much art as science, where even the best snipers in the world struggled to achieve consistent hits. Lieutenant Volkov gathered the advanced trainees, his expression serious. Today's exercise is simple in concept, brutal in execution. You will each attempt shots at 1,200 meters, then 1,500 if successful. We're looking for first-round hits. In combat, you rarely get a second chance. The target doesn't know you're shooting until that bullet arrives. If you miss, they disappear. He gestured to the equipment table. You'll use the same rifles you've been training with. No special ammunition. No excuses. This is about reading conditions perfectly and executing fundamentally sound shooting. Questions? There were none. The trainees understood what was at stake. This was the evaluation that would determine their final placement. Excellence here meant deployment with elite units. Failure meant reassignment to conventional sniper teams, still respectable but not legendary. Alexei shot first. He took his time, using a ballistic calculator to determine his adjustments, consulting wind meters, recording temperature and barometric pressure. When he finally fired at 1,200 meters, the shot missed by 2 feet. A respectable attempt, but not the first-round hit required. The others followed, each struggling with the extreme distance. One managed to hit at 1,200 meters after 4 attempts. The rest couldn't connect at all, their rounds impacting high, low, left, or right as they struggled to account for all the variables. Colonel Petrov watched with the patient attention of someone who understood how difficult these shots were. He had made them himself countless times during his career, knew the frustration of watching rounds sail past targets that seemed impossibly small through the scope. When Elena's turn came, she walked to the firing line carrying her rifle and a simple notebook. No electronic ballistic calculator, no expensive wind meters, just the tools her grandfather had taught her to rely on. Her eyes, her experience, her instinct. She settled into her shooting position and began her observation. The wind flags told a story. Steady breeze from the left, approximately 8 knots. But that was here, at the firing line. At 1,200 meters away, the flags showed slightly different patterns. The wind wasn't consistent across the entire distance. She would need to account for that. She looked at the mirage visible through her scope, watching how it boiled and shifted. This told her about temperature layers, about how the air itself would affect her bullet's path. She noted the angle of the sun, the shadows on the hillside, every tiny detail that might matter. Then she did something unexpected. She stood up, walked 20 meters to the side, lay down in a different position and observed again. She was checking how conditions varied across the shooting area, gathering more data, building a complete picture in her mind. Lieutenant Volkov raised an eyebrow but said nothing. This was unorthodox but not forbidden. Elena returned to her original position, made notes in her notebook, then settled behind her rifle. She adjusted her scope, calculated her holdovers, and prepared for the shot. But she didn't rush. She waited, watching the wind flags, feeling the air itself. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Some of the observers grew restless. Is she going to shoot or just lie there all day? One of the visiting officers muttered to the colonel. Patience, Petrov replied quietly. She's reading the environment, watch. Elena finally fired. Through the spotting scopes, observers saw the impact. Direct center hit at 1,200 meters. First round. A murmur ran through the group. That was genuinely impressive. Several of the trainees exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of respect and disbelief. 1,500 meters, Lieutenant Volkov announced. Same requirement. First round hit. Elena didn't move from her position. She simply adjusted her scope, recalculated her holds based on the increased distance, and began her observation again. 1,500 meters introduced additional complications. The bullet would be in flight for almost 2 seconds. Earth's rotation actually became a factor at this range, pushing the round slightly right in the northern hemisphere. Most snipers knew the theory. Few could successfully apply it in practice. She waited again, reading wind patterns, watching for the perfect moment when all variables aligned with her solution. When she fired, the shot felt right. That indefinable sense that came from thousands of repetitions, from deep understanding of ballistics and conditions. The spotters confirmed it. Center hit at 1,500 meters. Colonel Petrov leaned forward now, his full attention focused on Elena. This was beyond good shooting. This was approaching mastery. Lieutenant Volkov looked at the colonel, a silent question in his eyes. The colonel nodded. "There's a target at 3,000 meters, Volkov said quietly, speaking only to Elena. "Almost 2 miles. Only a handful of snipers in the entire military have ever successfully made that shot under field conditions. The colonel is one of them. I am not. No one expects you to hit it, but if you want to try, you have permission." Elena looked downrange. 3,000 meters was absurd. The target was barely visible even through high-power optics. The bullet would drop over 30 feet during its flight. Wind drift could push it yards off course. Temperature, humidity, altitude, the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, even the spin drift of the bullet itself, all became significant factors. It should have been impossible. And yet something in her grandfather's training, in her own obsessive study of ballistics in the countless hours she had spent alone in the forest, learning to read nature itself, whispered that maybe it wasn't. "I would like to try." "Sir," she said. The word spread quickly. Everyone at the facility came to watch. Basic trainees who heard the news over radios, instructors, support staff. They lined the observation area, knowing they might witness something extraordinary. Elena moved to a specialized shooting position built for extreme range attempts. She spent 30 minutes just observing. She watched birds fly through the space her bullet would travel, noting how they drifted in the wind. She studied the terrain, looking for indicators of air movement that weren't visible on wind flags. She made page after page of notes, calculations, observations. The rifle she would use was the same Dragunov she had trained with, not ideally suited for extreme range, but the only weapon available. The ammunition was standard military issue, not the specialized long-range rounds that professional record-setting snipers used. She would be pushing the weapon beyond its intended limits. When she finally settled behind the rifle, a hush fell over the observers. Even the wind seemed to quiet. Through her scope, the target at 3,000 meters was a tiny speck. She calculated her holdover. At this distance, she would be aiming almost 40 feet above the target, trusting ballistics to bring the bullet down onto the mark. Her windage correction would place her crosshairs several feet to the left of the target, trusting the wind to carry the bullet back to center. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heartbeat, became absolutely still. The world contracted to nothing but the scope picture, the calculations in her mind, and the feel of the trigger against her finger. She waited. Not for perfect conditions, those didn't exist at 3,000 meters, but for the moment when all the chaotic variables aligned as closely as they ever would. She fired. The bullet left the barrel at almost 3,000 feet per second, beginning its journey through the air. For nearly 4 seconds, it flew through space, rising above the firing line, reaching the apex of its arc, then descending toward the distant target. Wind pushed it. Gravity pulled it. The rotation of the Earth itself influenced its path, and then, impossibly miraculously, the spotters called out the hit. Not just a hit, a center mass impact at 3,000 meters. The silence that followed was profound. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the entire observation area erupted in applause. Trainees who had mocked her, instructors who had doubted her. They all stood and applauded this quiet woman who had just accomplished something that would become legendary in military sniper circles. Colonel Petrov approached the firing line, his weathered face showing rare emotion, respect, admiration, recognition of something truly exceptional. "In 40 years of service," he said quietly, so only Elena could hear, "I have seen perhaps 5 shooters with your level of natural ability. Your grandfather would be impossibly proud. Your brother's memory is honored by what you have become." Elena stood, saved her rifle, and for the first time since arriving at the training facility, she allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, sir."